The rifle blast shattered the morning silence as Kestrel McBride dropped the charging Wolf with a single shot, its massive body crashing just 10 feet from the trembling women huddled behind his water trough. Blood streaked down his weathered face from where the beast's claws had raked him during their brutal struggle, but his steel-gray eyes never left the 5 Apache women who had materialized on his ranch like desert spirits at dawn. "Mister, please," the eldest woman gasped in broken English, clutching a baby to her chest while the other 4 pressed close around her. "We have nowhere else to go." Kestrel lowered his Winchester, studying the desperate faces before him. These weren't ordinary travelers. Their traditional dress was torn and mud-stained, their dark eyes hollow with grief and exhaustion. The youngest couldn't be more than 18, while the eldest might have seen 40 winters. All wore the unmistakable marks of recent widowhood, hair shorn close, faces painted with ash and clay. "How long you been running?" he asked roughly, noting how they flinched at every sound, how their hands instinctively reached for children and belongings that weren't there. 7 days, replied the eldest, whom the others called Ayana. "Soldiers came to our village. They killed our husbands, burned everything. We escaped with only our lives." Kestrel had heard the stories. The territorial governor was pushing harder than ever to relocate all Apache tribes using increasingly brutal methods. He'd spent 15 years as a cavalry scout before retiring to this remote corner of New Mexico, and he'd seen enough blood to last several lifetimes. "Can't stay here?" he said finally, watching hope die in their eyes. "This is the first place they'll look." Ayana's composure cracked. "Then we will die. The desert has taken everything from us. Our children, our mothers, our—" "Didn't say I wouldn't help," Kestrel interrupted. He gestured toward the hidden canyon that lay beyond his property. "There's caves up there, natural springs. Could hide an army if needed." The woman beside Ayana Nalnish, judging by how the others deferred to her wisdom, stepped forward. She was perhaps 30, with intelligent eyes that seemed to peer straight into his soul. "Why would you help us? Your people killed our families." Kestrel met her gaze steadily. "I ain't like other men." For 3 years he'd lived alone on this ranch, speaking to no one except his horses and the occasional supply merchant. He'd chosen solitude after too many years of violence, too many faces haunting his dreams. But something about these women stirred feelings he'd thought long dead. "We have nothing to offer in return," whispered Chenoa, the youngest, her voice barely audible. "Didn't ask for nothing," Kestrel replied, already moving toward his cabin. "Get your things. We leave before the sun gets higher." As he gathered supplies, he caught glimpses of them through his window. They moved with the fluid grace of desert dwellers, but their movements were edged with trauma. The 4th woman, Adzila, kept scanning the horizon with the paranoid intensity of someone who'd seen too much death. The 5th, Halona, held herself. Apart from the others, her grief so raw it seemed to radiate from her like heat. Kestrel had saved countless people during his scouting days, but never had he felt such a powerful pull towards strangers. Maybe it was their dignity in the face of devastation, or the way they'd chosen to protect each other rather than scatter to the winds. Whatever it was, he knew his solitary life had just ended. The hidden canyon proved to be a sanctuary beyond their wildest hopes. Ancient cliff dwellings carved into red sandstone walls provided shelter, while crystal streams fed by underground springs ensured fresh water year-round. Kestrel had discovered this place during his first year on the ranch, but he'd never imagined sharing it with anyone. "This is sacred ground," Nalnish breathed as they explored the caves. Her fingers traced petroglyphs left by ancestors centuries. "Dead. How did you find it?" "Followed a wounded deer," Kestrel admitted, setting down his pack. "She led me straight here, like she wanted me to see it." The women worked with quiet efficiency, transforming the largest cave into a livable space. Their movements revealed a lifetime of adaptability. They knew exactly how to arrange sleeping areas for maximum warmth, where to store food to keep it safe from animals, how to create a cooking area that wouldn't fill the cave with smoke. Kestrel found himself mesmerized by their competence. After 3 years of bachelor neglect, watching them create order from chaos felt almost magical. Ayana organized their meager supplies with the skill of a seasoned quartermaster, while Chenoa gathered medicinal plants she recognized from the canyon walls. "You're hurt," Alona said quietly, approaching him with a bowl of water and clean cloth torn from her own dress. It was the first time she'd spoken since their arrival. Kestrel touched his face, having forgotten about the Wolf's claws in the falls and the chaos of relocation. "It's nothing." "Sit," she commanded with surprising authority. "Infection kills more men than bullets." As she cleaned his wounds, Kestrel studied her face. She was perhaps 25, with high cheekbones and lips that looked like they'd once smiled easily. Now grief had carved deep lines around her eyes. "You lost a husband in the raid?" he asked gently. Her hand stilled. "Husband and 2 sons. The youngest was only 4 winters." The pain in her voice hit him like a physical blow. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring them back," she whispered, but her touch remained gentle as she applied a poultice of herbs to his cuts. Over the following days, routines developed naturally. Kestrel would leave before dawn to tend his ranch and check for signs of pursuit, returning each evening with supplies and news. The women transformed the canyon into a hidden village, complete with gardens planted in carefully tended soil and a sophisticated system for collecting rainwater. Adsila proved to have an uncanny ability to remain invisible, scouting the canyons perimeter with skills that impressed even Kestrel's trained eye. "Cavalry patrol passed 2 miles south yesterday," she reported one evening. 20 men, heading east toward the territorial capital. "They're expanding the search," Kestrel mused. "Won't be safe to stay here much longer." "Where can we go?" Ayana asked. "Every territory is the same now. No place for Apache people to live in peace." That night, Kestrel lay awake staring at the stars through the cave opening. He'd spent years trying to forget the atrocities he'd witnessed during the Indian Wars, the families destroyed in the name of progress and civilization. Now he was harboring 5 fugitives who represented everything he'd once fought against, and finding himself more alive than he'd felt in years. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Chenoa burst into the main cave, breathless with excitement and terror. "Riders coming, many riders." Kestrel grabbed his rifle and followed her to the canyon rim. Below, a dust cloud marked the approach of at least 30 mounted men. Too many to fight, too many to hide from if they decided to search the canyon thoroughly. "Military?" Nalnish asked, joining them with her own captured cavalry rifle. Kestrel squinted through the morning haze. "Worse, bounty hunters." The territorial government had placed a substantial reward on Apache fugitives, and word was spreading. These weren't soldiers bound by military codes of conduct. These were men who saw Apache scalps as currency. "We fight," Adsila said simply, checking her knife. 5 women and 1 old cowboy against 30 armed men? Ayana shook her head. "That's not fighting, that's suicide." But Kestrel was already moving, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe not. This canyon has more than one way out. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its risks. While the bounty hunters combed the main canyon, searching caves and following false trails Adsila had expertly laid, Kestrel would lead the women through a treacherous passage he discovered months ago, a narrow chimney that led to the canyon's back wall, emerging near a hidden spring 2 miles away. "The passage is barely wide enough for 1 person," he warned as they gathered their essential supplies. "One slip, one loose rock, and we'll all die." "Better than what those men have planned for us," Nalnish said grimly. She'd spent the morning sharpening her knife and checking her ammunition, preparing for a fight she hoped wouldn't come. The sound of approaching voices echoed through the canyon as they slipped into the narrow crevice. Kestrel went first, his broad shoulders scraping against the sandstone walls. Behind him, he could hear the women's controlled breathing, their careful movements as they navigated the treacherous path in complete darkness. "Keep moving," Halona whispered from somewhere behind him. "I can hear them in the main cave." The passage seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the heart of the mesa. Twice they had to squeeze through openings so narrow that Kestrel feared they'd become trapped. But each time the women proved more flexible than their circumstances suggested. When they finally emerged into daylight, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. They were on a plateau overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness with no sign of their pursuers. "Where do we go now?" Chenoa asked, exhaustion clear in her young voice. Kestrel studied the landscape, considering their options. To the east lay settlements that would turn them in for the bounty. To the west was deeper desert, but also Apache territory that might offer sanctuary. To the north, "There's an old Spanish mission about 20 miles north," he said finally. "Abandoned for 50 years, but the buildings are still solid. Father Miguel used to run it. He's dead now, but his nephew Antonio still visits sometimes. He's got no love for the territorial government. You would take us to your own people?" Ayana asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Antonio's people are Mexican, not American. And he believes all people deserve God's protection, regardless of their blood." They traveled through the night, moving carefully across terrain that could hide 100 dangers. Kestrel led them along ancient animal trails, paths that wouldn't show their passage to trackers, but required intimate knowledge of the desert to navigate safely. As they walked, conversations began to flow more freely than they had in the canyon. Perhaps it was the shared danger, or the way the starlight created intimacy in the vast darkness. But the women began to share their stories. Ayana spoke of her husband, a respected warrior who tried to negotiate peace with the territorial government right up until the moment soldiers gunned him down under a flag of truce. Chenoa talked about her childhood, how she'd learned to weave and cook and tend horses, all the skills that should have prepared her for a long, happy life that now seemed impossible. "What about you, cowboy?" Nalnish asked as they paused to rest beside a natural spring. "What made you choose solitude over civilization?" Kestrel was quiet for so long they thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke into the darkness. "I've killed men. Too many men. Some deserved it, some didn't. After a while you realize that every bullet you fire changes you, makes you less human. I came here to find whatever was left of my soul." "And did you find it?" Halona asked softly. He looked at their faces, illuminated by starlight and the distant glow of their destination. "Maybe. Maybe helping you is my chance to balance the scales." The mission appeared at dawn like a mirage, its adobe walls rose-colored in the early light. Bell towers stood empty against the sky, and the courtyard was overgrown with desert plants, but the buildings remained sturdy after decades of abandonment. "Dios mío!" a voice called out in Spanish. A thin man in his 40s emerged from the chapel, crossing himself at the sight of their unlikely group. "Kestrel McBride? What brings you to this holy place with such interesting companions?" "Antonio," Kestrel nodded. "These women need sanctuary. The territorial government is hunting them." Antonio's expression grew serious as he studied the Apache women. "There are bounties on Apache fugitives. Harboring them could mean prison or death." "Then you understand the stakes," Kestrel replied. For a long moment, Antonio weighed their request. Then his shoulders straightened with resolve. "My uncle always said this place was meant to shelter God's children. Come, we will find you rooms and food. But you cannot stay long even here. You are not truly safe." 3 weeks at the mission transformed their desperate flight into something resembling community. The women worked alongside Antonio to restore parts of the complex, their skilled hands breathing life back into spaces that had been empty for decades. Gardens sprouted in the courtyard, filled with native plants that Genoa coaxed from the Finoa Senna desert soil. The old kitchen began producing meals that filled the complex with warmth and the sense of home. Kestrel found himself drawn into their daily rhythms in ways that surprised him. After years of solitary existence, the sound of feminine voices, the gentle bustle of shared tasks, and the quiet companionship of evening conversations felt like awakening from a long dream. "You have good hands for someone who claims to be rough." Around the edges, Nalnish observed one afternoon as she watched him repair a damaged roof beam. She was working nearby, weaving baskets from willow branches with a kind of intricate skill that took years to master. "Had to learn everything when I built my ranch," Kestrel replied, conscious of how her presence made him more aware of his movements, his words. No one else to do the work. "Is that why you never married? No one to share the work with?" The question hung in the air between them. Kestrel had avoided such personal territory for years, but something about Nalnish's direct gaze made evasion feel impossible. "Thought about it once," he admitted, "before the war. But after. Seemed cruel to bring someone into the darkness I was carrying." "Darkness shared is darkness divided," she said quietly. "That's what my grandmother used to say." Their conversations were interrupted by Antonio's urgent approach. "Riders coming," he announced, his face pale with worry. "Maybe 15 men, well armed. They'll be here within the hour." The women moved with practiced efficiency, gathering their few possessions and preparing for another flight. But Kestrel found himself hesitating, studying the mission's defensive possibilities. "What if we didn't run?" he said suddenly. Ayana looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. 5 women, 1 cowboy, and a priest against 15 bounty hunters? "This place was built to withstand raids," Kestrel pointed out. "Thick walls, defensible positions, and we've got the high ground. More importantly, we'd be fighting for something worth defending instead of just running forever." "They'll burn us out," Adzila said pragmatically. "Adobe doesn't burn easy. And there's wells inside the walls. We can outlast a siege if we need to." Helona stepped forward, her dark eyes blazing with sudden fire. "I'm tired of running. Tired of being hunted like animals. If we're going to die, let's die fighting." One by one, the others nodded their agreement. Even Antonio, despite his obvious terror, straightened his shoulders and declared, "This is God's house. If they want to defile it, they'll have to go through me first." The next hour passed in frantic preparation. Kestrel directed the fortification efforts with military precision, while the women distributed weapons and ammunition. They had 2 rifles, several pistols, plenty of knives, and the kind of desperate courage that had toppled governments. "Remember," Kestrel told them as they took their positions, "we're not trying to kill them all. We just need to make it too expensive for them to keep trying. Bounty hunters are businessmen. If the cost gets too high, they'll find easier prey." The attackers came at midday, whooping and firing as they charged across the open ground toward the mission gates. But their confidence evaporated when disciplined rifle fire from the bell towers began dropping men and horses with devastating accuracy. "Whoever's in there knows what they're doing," one of the bounty hunters shouted. "This ain't no bunch of scared squaws." Kestrel smiled grimly from his position atop the chapel. Nalnish was beside him, reloading his spare rifle with movements. As smooth as water. Not bad for a weaver, he commented. I wasn't always a weaver, she replied, sighting carefully before dropping another attacker. The cavalry taught me to shoot when they killed my first husband. Seemed only fair to learn their lessons well. The siege continued through the afternoon, but the bounty hunter's heart wasn't in it. They'd expected easy prey, not a fortress defended by skilled marksmen. As the sun began to set, painting the mission walls blood red, their leader called, "A retreat! This ain't over!" He shouted from beyond rifle range. "We know you're in there, and we know what you're worth. We'll be back with more men." But Kestrel knew they wouldn't. Word would spread that the Apache fugitives had found serious protection, and the smart money would look for easier targets. The mission had become their sanctuary in truth as well as name. That night, as they shared a meal in the restored refectory, something had changed between all of them. They were no longer refugees and reluctant protector. They were a family forged in fire, bound by shared danger and mutual trust. "So what happens now?" Chenoa asked. "Do we stay here forever?" "Forever's a long time," Kestrel said, but his eyes found each of their faces in turn. "But for now, this feels like home." Winter settled over the mission like a blessing, bringing months of isolation that allowed their unconventional family to grow deeper roots. Snow occasionally dusted the desert, transforming the adobe walls into something magical. While inside, the restored rooms glowed with warmth from carefully tended fires. Kestrel found himself changing in ways that both surprised and unsettled him. The harsh edges, worn smooth by years of solitude, began to soften under the influence of daily companionship. He laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and discovered that his capacity for tenderness hadn't died after all. It had simply been waiting for the right circumstances to bloom again. "You're different than when you first found us," Helona observed one evening as they sat together in the chapel, watching stars appear through the open bell tower. She'd taken to seeking his company after the others retired, their conversations growing more intimate as the weeks passed. "Different how?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Less alone, even when you're by yourself. Like you've remembered how to be part of something larger." Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, built on shared silences and small gestures rather than grand declarations. She would tend his cuts after repair work. He would save the choicest portions of meat for her plate. Their hands would brush when passing tools. Their eyes would meet across the courtyard with messages too complex for words. "I lost my heart in this war," she'd told him one night. "Not just to grief, but to hatred. Watching my children die made me want to kill everything beautiful in the world. But you make me remember why beauty matters." Meanwhile, the other women had found their own paths to healing. Ayana had appointed herself mission administrator, organizing their supplies and planning for the future with the efficiency of a natural leader. Chenoa had discovered a talent for music, creating haunting melodies on a flute carved from desert wood that filled the evenings with bittersweet beauty. Nalnish spent her days in the workshop Antonio had established, weaving baskets and textiles that were so exquisite they bordered on art. Her nimble fingers seemed capable of transforming any material into something both functional and beautiful. "I never thought to see such skill," Antonio marveled one afternoon, examining a blanket that seemed to capture the colors of sunrise. "My uncle would have said you were blessed by the Virgin herself." But it was Adsila who surprised them most. The woman who'd seemed most damaged by trauma revealed herself to be a natural teacher, working with Antonio to establish a small school in one of the restored rooms. She taught the traditional Apache ways of reading weather and terrain, while he shared Spanish and basic literacy. "Knowledge is the only treasure that can't be stolen," she explained when Kestrel questioned the wisdom of leaving written records. If we're going to survive in this changing world, we need to understand it better. Spring brought both hope and danger. The first was embodied by Chenoa's announcement that she'd been secretly corresponding with a young Apache man from a reservation 200 miles south. "His name is Joaquin," she said shyly. "He wants to come here, to meet all of you, and ask permission to court me properly." The danger came in the form of a new territorial governor who was taking a harder line on Apache fugitives. Word reached them through Antonio's network of contacts that a massive bounty had been placed on their heads, enough money to tempt even honest men into betrayal. "We need to consider our options," Ayanna said during one of their evening council meetings. "Stay and risk discovery, or scatter and lose everything we've built here." "There's a third option," Kestrel said quietly. He'd been thinking about this for weeks, turning the idea over in his mind like a smooth stone. "We could make this legitimate." "What do you mean?" Nalnish asked. "Marriage," he said simply. 5 Apache women married to men with legal standing in the territory. Wives can't be hunted like fugitives, and husbands have the right to protect their families. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Halona spoke. "Are you proposing to all of us?" Kestrel felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm proposing to you," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "As for the others, Antonio's been alone too long, and he's got Mexican citizenship that would protect any wife. There are other good men in the area who might be willing ... "No," Ayanna interrupted firmly. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. No arrangements with strangers, no marriages of convenience. We choose partners we could actually love." Over the following days, conversations took on new dimensions as the women considered their options. Chenoa was eager to invite Joaquin for a visit, while Nalnish surprised everyone by admitting she'd been exchanging letters with a widowed merchant who'd stopped at the mission months earlier. "His name is Philippe," she said, blushing slightly. "He's kind, and he makes me laugh. And he has a trading post near the Mexican border where Apache people are welcome." Adsila proved the most practical about the whole arrangement. "Love is luxury," she said bluntly. "Safety is necessity. But maybe, if we're very fortunate, we can find both." Only Ayanna seemed reluctant to consider the marriage option. "I was a war chief's wife," she said quietly. "I led women in battle, made decisions that affected the entire tribe. I don't know how to be just someone's wife." "Then don't be just someone's wife," Kestrel replied. "Be yourself, married. Any man who can't handle that doesn't deserve you." As spring deepened into early summer, the mission began to feel like a place where impossible dreams might actually take root and flourish. Summer brought a procession of suitors that transformed the quiet mission into something resembling a frontier. Social season. Joaquin arrived first, a earnest young man with calloused hands and eyes that lit up whenever he looked at Chenoa. Antonio performed their betrothal ceremony in the chapel, his voice thick with emotion as he blessed their union. Felipe came next, bringing wagon loads of trade goods and enough nervous energy to power a steam engine. But his anxiety melted away the moment Nalnish smiled at him, and their wedding 2 weeks later was a celebration that lasted 3 days and drew visitors from settlements 50 miles away. "I never thought I'd see such joy in this place," Antonio confided to Kestrel as they watched Felipe's friends dance with Apache women in the mission courtyard. "My uncle always said God works in mysterious ways, but this surpasses even his imagination." The most surprising development came when Captain Marcus Holloway arrived with a cavalry patrol, ostensibly hunting for Apache fugitives. But the weathered officer took one look at Ayanna directing the wedding preparations with military precision and seemed to forget entirely about his official mission. "Ma'am," he said, removing his hat with uncharacteristic awkwardness. "I don't Suppose you'd have time to discuss logistics? I've got supply problems that are making my sergeants consider desertion. Ayanna studied him with the calculating gaze of someone who'd outmaneuvered cavalry units in the field. What kind of problems? Their conversation lasted 4 hours and resulted in an arrangement that stunned everyone. Holloway would hire Ayanna as a civilian contractor to reorganize his supply chains, paying her a salary that would give her complete independence. "I'm not marrying for protection," she announced that evening. "If Marcus wants to court me, he can do it properly, knowing I have choices." But the biggest surprise was Adsila, who'd been quietly corresponding with a circuit-riding judge named Benjamin Cross. When he arrived at the mission, a tall man with silver hair and intelligent eyes, she greeted him with the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her since the massacre. "Benny and I have been friends for 20 years, she explained to the others' amazement. "He was the territorial attorney who tried to prevent the Apache relocations. We met when he was investigating army atrocities. You never mentioned." Halona began. "Some things are too precious to share until you know they're real," Adsila replied, her hand finding the judge's with natural ease. Kestrel and Halona's own wedding took place on a perfect evening in late July, with the desert painted in shades of gold and purple. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, incorporating traditional Apache designs with Spanish lace that Antonio had discovered in the mission storage rooms. "Do you take this woman to be your wife, to love and protect her as long as you both shall live?" Antonio asked, his words carrying across the courtyard where their extended family had gathered. "I do," Kestrel replied, meaning it more completely than he'd ever meant anything in his life. When Halona spoke her own vows, her voice was strong and clear. "I take you as my husband, knowing that love shared makes us both stronger than we ever were alone." The kiss that sealed their union tasted of hope and new beginnings, of lives that had been shattered and remade into something more beautiful than what came before as autumn approached. The mission had become the heart of a small but thriving community. Joaquin and Chenoa were expecting their first child, while Felipe's trading post provided economic stability for everyone. Captain Holloway's courtship of Ayanna had become the subject of good-natured betting among his soldiers, who couldn't decide whether their commanding officer was more terrified of Apache warriors or his own romantic feelings. Judge Cross and Adsila divided their time between the mission and the territorial capital, where they were quietly working to reform the laws governing Native American rights. Their combined influence was already making life safer for Apache families throughout the region, but it was Kestrel and Halona's relationship that seemed to anchor everything else. Their love had grown from shared trauma into something deep and unshakable, a partnership that combined his practical skills with her intuitive wisdom. "We've built something worth defending here," Halona said one evening as they stood together on the bell tower, watching the sunset over their chosen family. "Not just a place, but a way of living that proves different people can find peace together. Think it will last?" Kestrel asked, though he already knew her answer. "Nothing lasts forever," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "But some things last long enough to matter, long enough to change the world, one life at a time." Below them, the mission courtyard glowed with lantern light as their friends and family shared the evening meal. Laughter echoed off the ancient walls, mixing with the soft sound of Chenoa's flute and the murmur of conversations in 3 languages. It was the sound of home, Kestrel realized. The sound of a dream made real through courage, compassion, and the revolutionary act of choosing love over fear. 5 years after that first desperate morning, when 5 Apache widows had begged for shelter, the mission had become a legend throughout the territory. Stories spread of the place where former enemies had found peace, where Apache wisdom merged with Spanish faith and frontier pragmatism to create something entirely new. Kestrel walked through the bustling courtyard on a crisp October morning, marveling at how completely his world had transformed. Children played between the workshops, his and Halona's twin boys, toddling after their older cousin, Genoa and Joaquin's precocious daughter. The sound of their laughter mixed with the ring of hammers from the blacksmith shop that Felipe had established, and the steady rhythm of looms from Nalnish's expanding textile business. "Papa Kestrel," little Maria called out, running to him with outstretched arms. She was Genoa's youngest, born with her mother's musical gifts and her father's stubborn chin. "Mama says you promised to teach me to ride today. Did I now?" Kestrel scooped her up, delighting in her giggle. Well, a man's only as good as his word. The stables had grown from a simple shelter to a proper facility, housing horses that were the envy of ranchers throughout the region. Joaquin had proved to have an almost supernatural gift with animals, while Kestrel's knowledge of breeding and training had created a business that provided steady income for the entire community. "The children love you," Halona observed, joining them with baby Rosa strapped to her chest. Their youngest daughter had been born just 6 months ago, completing their family in ways that still took Kestrel's breath away. "They love everyone here," he replied, kissing his wife's forehead. "That's what makes this place special." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar figure. Captain Holloway, now Colonel Holloway, rode through the mission gates with his usual military bearing, but his stern expression softened the moment he spotted Iana emerging from the administration building. Their courtship had lasted 3 years before she finally agreed to marry him, insisting that she needed to be certain he understood she would never be a conventional officer's wife. Now they divided their time between the mission and Fort Sumner, where Iana's organizational genius had revolutionized military logistics throughout the Southwest. "Marcus," she called out, striding across the courtyard with a confident bearing that had made her a legendary war leader. "You're early. The supply contracts aren't ready for review until tomorrow." "I'm not here on business," he replied, dismounting with a grin that made him look decades younger. "I'm here because my wife promised to teach our son how to fish, and he's been driving the sergeants crazy with anticipation." Their adopted son, an Apache boy orphaned in the same raids that had claimed the original refugees' families, came running from the school building where Adzila still taught traditional skills alongside modern academics. At 8 years old, Little Thunder had his adoptive mother's strategic mind and his father's military discipline, making him a formidable force despite his size. "Did someone mention fishing?" Judge Cross asked, appearing from the chapel where he'd been helping Antonio prepare for Sunday services. At 65, Benny moved more slowly than he once had, but his mind remained as sharp as ever, and his influence had been crucial in passing legislation that protected Native American rights throughout the territory. "The whole family's invited," Adzila declared, emerging from the school with her usual serene smile. "I packed enough food for a small army." As the extended family prepared for their outing, Kestrel found himself reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. The bitter, solitary man who'd lived alone on a remote ranch seemed like a stranger now, his harsh edges worn smooth by years of love, laughter, and shared purpose. "Penny for your thoughts," Philippe said, joining him near the corral where the horses waited. The merchant had grown prosperous over the years, but prosperity had only made him more generous, funding expansions to the mission and supporting Apache families throughout the region. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Kestrel replied. 5 years ago, I thought my story was over. Now it feels like it's just beginning." "The best stories are like that," Nalnish added, approaching with a picnic basket woven from her own designs. "They seem to end, but they're really just beginning new chapters." The fishing expedition became an impromptu celebration with 3 generations splashing in the stream while stories and laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Kestrel watched his twin boys help their grandfather Antonio bait hooks, while Halona taught the older children traditional Apache fishing songs. "You know what I love most about this place?" Chenoa said, settling beside him on the bank while baby Rosa napped in her arms. "It's not just that we found safety here. It's that we found ourselves." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in familiar shades of gold and crimson, the families began the journey back to the mission. But Kestrel and Halona lingered by the stream, sharing the kind of comfortable silence that only comes after years of true partnership. "Any regrets?" she asked, echoing a question from their early days together. Kestrel considered this seriously, as he always did when she asked the important questions. "About giving up solitude? About opening my heart to all this chaos and joy and responsibility? About any of it?" He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of sage and sunshine that always clung to her hair. "The only thing I regret is all the years I wasted before I found you. Before I learned that being alone isn't the same as being at peace."